Should people in their 20s prioritize work-life balance? In their 20s, some people stay at the office late into the night chasing promotions, while others clock out on time to protect their health and personal life. You may have argued with friends or coworkers about which of these choices is wiser in the long run. Should people in their 20s prioritize work-life balance, or is it smarter to focus almost entirely on work while they are still young? In this video, we run a 10-round, 20-turn debate where both sides present strong arguments on equal footing. Which side do you agree with more? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's get started.
In conclusion, I believe it is precisely in your 20s that you should prioritize work-life balance. In Japan, even people in their 20s often take long working hours for granted, and there are many cases where they end up leaving their jobs due to depression or burnout. Even if you finally reach the starting line of your career, if you damage your body and mind, it can take years to recover, and the opportunity cost during that period is huge. I think that working while protecting your health, relationships, and a minimum level of sleep and leisure will actually increase your total lifetime working hours and total income in the long run.
I take the opposite view. In your 20s, you should tilt heavily toward work rather than work-life balance. In many industries, your track record and skill set are largely formed by your early 30s, and that effectively determines the upper bound of your future salary range and positions. When your physical strength and ability to absorb new things are at their peak, deliberately taking on tough projects that demand overtime and firefighting is exactly what makes many people grow. I think the expertise and network you gain there matter more over a lifetime than the short-term fatigue.
The problem is that this so-called firefighting experience tends to become the norm. Chronic, long working hours lead not only to sleep deprivation and lifestyle-related diseases, but also to increased risks of accidents and judgment errors, which actually lower productivity. If we look at the fact that European countries, which emphasize hourly productivity, have higher GDP than Japan, a way of working that values quality over sheer hours is more rational. Rather than assuming people in their 20s can push themselves indefinitely, I believe building in the rest they need is what creates business professionals who can stay in the game for the long haul.
But I am not convinced that Japanese companies' evaluation systems are really that quality-oriented yet. At the on-site level, people who take on difficult tasks and deliver results, or who stay late into the night to meet a deadline, are still often the ones who get the next opportunity. Even if you are aiming for foreign firms or startups, to win the trust that this person can be entrusted with important work by your 20s, an average way of working is often not enough. As a strategy to increase your future freedom, I think it is rational to make a concentrated investment of effort while you're young.
That said, your 20s are not only about work. Relationships with partners and friends, and experiences gained through living abroad or pursuing hobbies are easier to obtain at this stage of life. Those aspects of life can lead to language skills, communication abilities, and even new business ideas. Deliberately leaving time outside of work is not just playing around. I see it as diversifying the portfolio of yourself as human capital.
Life experience is important, but if you emphasize that too much, you run the risk that experiencing everything dilutes the intensity of your work. For many people, their 30s and beyond will inevitably see an increase in private responsibilities such as marriage, raising children, or caring for parents, making it physically harder to work long hours. That is exactly why I think you should lean hard toward work during your 20s when you are comparatively unencumbered and have fewer obligations so that you can raise your lifetime earnings and expand your career options. It seems more logical to restore balance later rather than earlier.
However, there are also people who burn out in their 20s and end up repeatedly quitting or taking leave before they even reach their 30s. Data in Japan show that a significant share of employees on leave due to mental health issues are in their 20s to early 30s. So it is not guaranteed that if you overwork when you are young, it will be easier later. On the contrary, I think that understanding your optimal workload from your 20s and setting upper limits on overtime and clear lines for when to rest makes it easier to keep taking on challenges over the long term. Valuing work-life balance is not about avoiding challenges. It is a prerequisite to making challenges sustainable.
On the other hand, there are many situations where genuine challenges simply do not come without a certain amount of overstretching. New business ventures or high-difficulty projects often have a high probability of failure and bring irregular lifestyles, but the learning curve is steep. Not everyone has to go that far, but choosing to stay safely within your comfort zone throughout your 20s can lead to regret in your 40s. I should have taken more risks back then. When weighing short-term health risks against long-term career returns, I believe there is value in accepting a certain amount of the former.
But it is precisely by glorifying this overstretching that we have ended up with a culture of overwork and karoshi. When company performance deteriorates, firms can lay off employees without hesitation and do not promise long-term security to individuals. In that context, it is an asymmetric risk for individuals alone to keep running based on the mindset of, I will sacrifice my own health and life for the company. From the 20s onward, I think it is more rational risk management to place the axis of your life on yourself rather than on the company, and to adopt a value system that prioritizes work-life balance.
Conversely, that is exactly why you need to build enough market value in your 20s so you will not have to depend on any one company. In the freelance or job market, what is evaluated is what you can do and what results you produced under difficult circumstances. To make that convincing, there has to be a phase where you live a very work-centered life and build up both the quality and quantity of your output. Rather than devoting yourself to the company, you are thickening your own resume and portfolio. For that purpose, I believe you should intentionally lean toward work in your 20s.
I think skills and track record are determined more by deliberate practice and feedback than by sheer hours. Drifting overtime and simply being present at work for a long time add almost nothing to your market value. In fact, finishing at a reasonable time with little or moderate overtime and then using the remaining hours for self-development, study, side projects, or creative work is more likely to lead to a multi-track career. Instead of fighting only within the frame of your company, I believe a strategy of nurturing multiple skills while maintaining balance between work and private life is the realistic approach in an era of rapid change.
As an ideal, I see your point, but in reality, there are many patterns where people spread themselves too thin by trying to juggle side jobs and hobbies before they are even fully competent in their main job and end up half-baked in everything. In specialist or technical roles, there's a landscape you simply cannot see unless you throw several consecutive years into the field, and only those who pour in intensive input and output during that period can enjoy more leeway in their 30s and beyond. Rather than going broad and shallow, I think it makes more sense to dig deep in your 20s first, and only then think about balance for the next decade.
Fundamentally, not everyone aspires to dig deep. There are people who value their own time, hobbies, and family life more than salary or job title, and there is no basis to deny that. Choosing to prioritize work-life balance in your 20s is a way for people with such values to design their own lives without being swept away by social expectations. I think we need a clear message that it is acceptable to choose a more balanced path, rather than imposing the social pressure that you must work hard when you are young.
Still, we cannot ignore the danger that this value system becomes an excuse for not making an effort. Some people say, I care about work-life balance, but in reality, they take neither their work nor their private life seriously, and time just drifts by. Your 20s are when your habits solidify, so once you slip into a good enough mode, it might be hard to shift into a higher gear later. That is why I think the default in this age range should be to maintain high standards and a strict attitude toward work.
On the other hand, confusing strictness with self-sacrifice is risky. If you keep working by cutting away your sleep, health, and minimal relationships, you may see results in the short term, but then suddenly stall out a few years later with health problems or loss of motivation. A stall in your 20s can make it difficult to rebuild your career afterwards. That is why I would say that being strict with yourself, while also understanding your limits and deciding where to draw the line for rest, is actually part of a high level of professionalism in the sense of work-life balance.
From the standpoint of professionalism, how far you can commit to clients and your team is also questioned. In reality, there is a difference in trust between someone who says before a deadline, I am going home now because I value my work-life balance, and someone who is willing to use weekends and nights when necessary to get things done. Of course, you do not have to be at full throttle all the time, but if you earn the label in your 20s that you cannot step up when it really matters, you may be excluded from important projects later on. For that reason, I think there are many moments when, while young, you should be willing to disrupt your balance to earn trust.
From the perspective of valuing work-life balance, I am not denying the act of stepping up when it really matters. The problem is when that becomes the rule rather than the exception. I think people in their 20s should learn a way of working with clear contrast. During exceptional busy periods, they push harder, but in normal times, they restrict overtime and take vacations in a planned manner. If you build that habit, it should be easier to control your allocation of resources when responsibilities grow heavier in your 30s and beyond.
Even so, I still believe that, as a default stance, work heavy in your 20s, then adjust the balance in your 30s and beyond offers a better risk-return ratio for the average person. There is a kind of resilience and decision-making ability you can only acquire by putting yourself in tough environments when you are young and subjecting yourself to high expectations. You can choose a path of remaining under moderate pressure for life, but given the overall competitive environment and future uncertainty, I think for many people it is a more rational bet to go all in while young.
I will stick to the position that people in their 20s should prioritize work-life balance. The reason is that I believe you can still achieve sufficient growth while protecting irreplaceable resources, such as health, mental well-being, and life experience. A way of working that depends on excessive self-sacrifice is not sustainable for individuals or for society in the long term. If more people in their 20s start working with balance in mind, companies' expectations about how they can use workers will also change, and that could ultimately lead to higher productivity and more innovation.
And I will not change my position that in your 20s, you should clearly prioritize commitment to work over work-life balance. I believe that only by rapidly building skills and a track record over a short period can you later gain the room to pursue balance. Individual values should be respected, but we also have to face the reality that how far you pushed yourself when you were young greatly affects your options later on. I want to recognize that reality, and despite that, intentionally recommend a work-heavy choice.
This concludes our 10-round debate on whether people in their 20s should prioritize work-life balance. In your 20s, how much would you prioritize work, and how much would you protect your life outside of work? Share your own plans, experiences, and opinions about balancing work and life in your 20s in the comments.